Yes, I'm very happy to be here, and you will see this is really much inspired by a lot of work that has been done in this lab for in the last 10 years. So I'm really excited to share this formalism. So the first part will be a more like soft introduction of why I'm interested in biology and how I think about biology-like design and why I think it's like a good idea to try to formalize from a very, very abstract perspective mathematical principles that underlie biology-like design, which is, as I would like to emphasize, fundamentally different than the engineering we are currently doing. And then the second part will be specifically about these goal assemblies, formalism, that is a minimal formalism for compositionality of physical goals. So okay, so this is why I'm interested in biology, and this is why I think it is an inspiring direction to take when we think about the future of engineering and design specifically. So I will be continuously in the boundary between science and engineering and design. So like I try to always one step here, one step there. Okay, so one thing is the underlying natural philosophy. So I think that these three things that I will tell you will help to form an angle onto goal assemblies. So this is another reason why I try to emphasize these three angles of how we can approach the concept of biology-like design. Okay, so the first one is the underlying natural philosophy, which I deeply believe in, and it might be controversial, but I think it's also good to talk about it, which is that biology is the most fundamental science in an emergent universe, which is our universe, and it's because biology builds emergent phenomena on top of each other cumulatively. So the most fundamental laws, those that most likely to generalize, will be the convergent emergent features that happen multiple times across biological scales. So if we end up looking at a totally new system, for example, an ecosystem of AI agents, I would suggest that biology is a better starting point than, for example, physics to understand such a new emergent system. So in this sense, biology is the most fundamental science in the emergent universe. And I call this the magnifying glass of selfish information propagation, because without selfish information propagation, you don't have this cumulative emergence. You might have emergence, very clear emergence and separation of scales and all these kind of things in physics, but you don't have cumulative emergence. So what are these computational primitives of emergent engineering? Well, in words, I would suggest that this is the three main domains we should focus on. One is cumulative selective history dependence. So how a very small fraction of complex objects are being selected in a huge space of possibilities. The second one is more inspired by metabolism, but more generally how functional complexes interact with each other combinatorially. And the third one, which I will focus on today, is hierarchical goal and competency integration. So how we can integrate small competencies to form bigger and bigger competencies, and what are the properties of such systems. Okay, so number two is design. So you can be complicated in very many ways. So this is the overlapping Ruby-Goldberg machines, including those objects that occur in multiple Ruby-Goldberg machines, and zebrafish signal transduction pathway in its early development, and the key pathways and how they overlap. So this is obviously mostly a joke, but you can be complicated in very many ways. Complicatedness is not a feature of biology. Something else is the feature of biology. And what is it? And when we do engineering, when we create designs, why do I say that we don't really make biology-like design? We make engineering-like design. And the reason we make engineering-like design is because we cannot not categorize, and we cannot not ask what for? So what is the purpose of this? What is the purpose of that? And I would like to suggest to designers and to engineers to try to abandon these inherent biases and try to focus on another domain of engineering, which is, of course, needs a totally different conceptual ecosystem. But what is that ecosystem? So the best way I think about it, or I like to think about it, is biology is existentialist technology. So what does it mean? It means that that biology doesn't use compressed models. So doesn't categorize and doesn't use compressed models. It is very different when you don't do multi-step planning, but and you don't force the different solutions into categories in the very first place. So number two is the huge difference between theoretical versus practical freedom of choice. And the number three is historical contingency and responsibility. So these three are present in existentialist philosophy and also in biology in the material form. Okay, so number three is recursivity. So in computation, recursive and language, recursivity gives this huge space of possibilities that we can describe, basically endless space of possibilities, and productivity. And it is key to try to understand emergent engineering system through building blocks that can be used recursively. So this has been talked about a lot, right? But the key to this is that the building blocks have double roles. They can be both functions or arguments, or they can be both in a more physical sense, the building blocks and one that is using the building blocks. I will very specifically talk about this in this goal assembly formalism. So how should we proceed? There are multiple already well understood domains where the condensation of these recursive building blocks are better understood. One is language, right? So how symbolicity emerges into multiple steps, and the other is AI. So we can look at these domains, but generally, I would like to suggest this kind of meta-factorization of a recursive modeling framework of emergent engineering. Why I say meta-factorization? Because it's a factorization of the theory or this general framework. And it is that there's the big picture, which is this structural recursive assembly of the final object. There is the center picture, which is as we will see, multiple steps of composition and then reduction, composition, reduction. So it's kind of expansion, reduction, expansion, reduction. The composition step describes a combination of possibilities, mathematically speaking, a direct product of the possibility spaces. And there is a reduction step, which might be a selection among those possibilities or a dimension reduction in a more general sense. And then the third one, which is the more microscopic one, is the representational picture, where you parameterize somehow these operations of composition and reduction. And they can be described, all these three can be described multiple ways. And I would like to suggest that we should try to figure out how to formalize these three separately and then put them together to form a coherent model of recursive emergent engineering modeling framework. Okay, so here is the more crisp, more well-defined part of the presentation, which is goal assembly formalism. So this is a holistic story, which means that it has been made holistically, but I will tell it semi-deductively, which means that I would like to emphasize the hypotheses that underlie this holistic framework first, and then I will try to explain what general features this kind of minimal and not fully mathematically formalized framework has. Okay, so this is the number one approximation, which is that you have one system that can achieve a bunch of goals, lowercase g1, g2, and so on, and you already observed that. And there is another one in this specific example. It's also g1 that can also achieve a set of goals. And the question is, what happens when you put them together in a very well-defined specific way, right? So this is these capital G's I call goal variables. This is just to name these objects. Obviously, these are very simple objects. And the lowercase g's I call goals. And when you put these two together, then you have a complex object that behaves somehow. The question is, can we describe this complex object that behaves, that follows the joint behavior of these two coupled G1s in a way that also follows the general framework of a goal variable that can be later on further integrated in this compositional sense. And so the simplest way this can be done is to assume that the achievable goal states of these G1s will form, all combinations of those will form the state space of G2, and then within that phase space, the goal variables of G2 will be selected. So the achievable goal states will be selected, and later on, this will happen again and again and again and again. So this tries to be a very practical framework, which means that I suggest that this transformation should be learned. So this theta 1, 1, 2 symbolizes goal combination. So goal combination makes the state space of the higher level variable, goal selection, and potential goal transformation, as those goals might be transformed as a consequence of the interaction between these two G1s. So this is approximation number one. Why is it an approximation? It's because obviously the direct product of all goal states of G1 and G1 is a very large set of possibilities, and if G1 and G1 are independent, they don't interact, then they will be the goal states of G2 as well. So the assumption is that somehow through their interaction, this state space will be reduced to a smaller set of states that are the goal states of G2. And that's a meaningful configuration space reduction. And if we iterate this step many, many times or multiple times, then we get overall a large enough configuration space reduction to find those global phenotypic states that are functional or have non-zero fitness and so on and so on. Okay, so the other assumption is that these goal variables interface only through goals, which means that in this previous case, no other information is kept as you integrate through the hierarchy than the goal states at every given step. This is a very important assumption, and it's probably obviously an oversimplification in case of real systems. But I would like to suggest that this goal assembly formalism is a core, and then it is intentionally oversimplifying, on top of which you can also add additional corrections. So this is a top-down view, which is that large emergent design should be broken down to smaller emergent designs recursively, so that the small competencies, or the small parts, behaviors in this specific sense of how these goal variable combinations happen, they can be learned effectively and then build up the system from that. So these are the two representations two visual representations I used throughout this paper, which really helped me to understand how you can combine and how a coarse graining can correspond to a visual hierarchy. Okay, so what happens when you combine multiple of these goal variables? The idea is that the phenotype is encoded through this vertical encoding through multiple goal composition rules, as opposed to a horizontal encoding, which is local configurations. So the horizontal encoding G1, 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 you might imagine these as cell states, or in a more physical setting, spin configurations. But what I would like to suggest is that instead of that, we should focus on a vertical encoding, which is to encode the phenotype to these goal composition rules that are themselves learned. And when you look at the phenotype this way, it will turn out that the selected goal lineages will represent the phenotype and also will take care of the internal robustness of the system. So here's an example. This is a super exponential configuration space reduction in terms of the hierarchical depth. So you have 4 possible states for each variable, or m in general, m possible states for each variable, and you combine two such systems, and then in the combined system you have m square potential states, from which you choose m to be the goal states, and then you do it again and again and again and again and again. And in this specific case where you select m out of m square, you get a double exponential reduction of configuration space in the depth of the hierarchy. But generally, if you select a sublinear number of goal states at every specific step, you get a super exponential configuration space reduction. So this is just an illustration to build intuition and to see what kind of systems we can build from the same building blocks. So another important feature is that these goal assemblies in this hierarchical formalism, they reproduce a genotype-phenotype map statistics, which are generally observed across different toy models of genotype-phenotype maps, but also input-output maps in artificial neural networks, which is the parallel distributed representation of phenotypes by genotypes. So there are few phenotypes that are represented by many genotypes, and there are very many phenotypes that are represented by few genotypes, and this is very generally observed. And it turns out that when you have a hierarchical system like this, and you assume dependency cascades, which means that if you go from top down, if you find a variable that doesn't depend on the variables under it, then the whole subtree is neutral, meaning that they also don't matter in the um, um, global outcome, which is represented by the top node. So this I call dependency cascades, and this obviously has an exponential amplification effect, and that exponential amplification effect generally produces power law distribution of of the representation of phenotypes by genotypes. So this is a very general mechanism, not just for goal variables, but general hierarchical systems where these dependency cascades take place. I haven't seen this articulated in the literature, but it might be the case that I'm not aware of it. Um, uh, but specifically for this goal assembly formalism, this is true as well.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, yes.
So when you combine two goals, are you considering the goals from the same agent or from different agent? Because for different agent, you might get something like the collection of the goal. The combined goal might be contradictory to the individual goals.
Exactly. I don't assume anything, whether it's the same
Oh.
agent or not the same agent. What I have in mind is a very practical setting where you measure the possible outcomes, the possible goals or small volumes of possibilities that a system achieves under very different settings, initial conditions and experimental conditions. These are the lowercase g goal states. So you measure in a specific case a collection of cells or any collective in collective behavior. You can name multiple systems where you can actually carry out this experiment very well, and then you combine, and then you try to use these goal states and only these goal states to understand what are the goal states of the combined system of, in this case, two G1s. And you try to approximate this, learn this combined behavior only using the goal states of the input variables. You try to learn the goal states of this combined system. And the assumption is that if you break down the many steps to the whole system in enough number of steps, so that these little combinations are small enough that they can be learned, and and obviously also factorizing the overall behavior good enough, then this framework might help understanding how the global what the global goal states are in this like hierarchical systems, and also guess new combinations. So what if you put this and this and this together? What if you put this and this and this together? So I imagine these thetas as a library of composition of collective behaviors when the collective behaviors are well approximated as goal directed. Did it answer the question?
Yeah. Thank you.
No, please ask questions. This is the first time I'm talking about this whole thing, so I very much appreciate if you help me with this.
Yeah. So the goal here is it's more like, does it have some like can you consider that as a reward function, or you didn't specify that?
It's a state, or in the continuous systems you can imagine a small volume in the configuration space.
So you want to go to that direction.
So it's a subset of configuration space, and this subset is assumed to be composed of smaller subsets.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
obviously, the point is that that they can be attractor states too, but they can also be representations of achievable goals of cognitive agents, which means that under new perturbations they can also reach these goals. But it's kind of intentional not to specify what the goals are, because then the much of the attention is about what goal states are. So I try to not talk about that at all, or as little as possible.
Okay, but in real world, the combined goal is highly dependent on how you combine.
Exactly.
Yeah, like if you consider game theory, then it's quite hard to solve. But if it's just like a multiple loss function in machine learning, it's quite easy.
Exactly. It's very much dependent on how you combine. So one specific microscopic implementation of this, I call this a cognitive framework, could be coupled Hopfield networks and the hierarchy of coupled Hopfield networks. When you put two Hopfield networks together, you can put them together and couple them very many ways, right? And the collective behavior of what are the attractor states that stay in the system and what are the basins of attractors and how they are transformed through the interaction will very much be determined by how the coupling takes place. So the coupling must be well specified, just as well as the system, as the underlying goal variables themselves. So in this sense, if you put two G1s together, in this specific description, this theta should also depend on how these two ones are combined to a two. Very much.
Interesting. Thank you.
So this is the framework, but the whole point of making this framework is to point out evolvability features, how they enhance the ability to find useful new structures in the huge space of possibilities. And so I divide these general mechanisms of evolvability in a general sense, so not only in an evolutionary sense, but in a general sense, to two types, parametric and structural. And and within each, there are two mechanisms. So number one, which is kind of the most microscopic in terms of changes, is a goal state gradient backpropagation, which can be understood by looking at this graph of how the goal variables are being combined hierarchically, and understanding that as a computational graph of a coarse graining approximation of the collective behavior of the whole phenotype. And then you can, if it's differentiable, which is obviously a Hopfield network, for example, as is in the standard case is not. But if you can differentiate, you can differentiate back through this computational graph. And what you get is a relationship between the global change, so how this G4 variable, which is assumed to represent the phenotype, the global phenotype, or the whole object, how the change of that and the goal states of that relates to the change of the goal states of the lower level variables, including the bottom variables G1. And so this is one thing you can get out of it, right? So how the different changes backpropagate to the system from the global scale to the local scale. But you can also get another thing out of it, which is if you assume that the different phenotypic traits are coupled. So you can imagine that at the G4 level, you have a bunch of phenotypic traits, and you apply some selection to the phenotype. So this is specifically from evolutionary theory, where the different phenotypic traits are generally coupled, and when you select on one, you might end up having changing another one, or many other ones. And this is described by this C matrix, which is this phenotype covariance matrix. And it turns out that you can also relate the phenotype covariance matrix at the top level and the bottom level through this backpropagation. So this might be a very useful, so this is another thing I haven't seen anywhere else, but that might be applicable to more general coarse graining approximations, hierarchical coarse graining approximations of this kind. And would obviously, the benefit would be to, I cannot say more than what the benefit has been in artificial neural networks. Okay, so the second one, which might be very intuitive from the very beginning, is this hierarchical decision making and memory retrieval. So this might be a trivial evolvability mechanism, but also a very important one, because that's the whole point of having goal states and having these target states that are reached under different perturbations to avoid the rest of the states. So one specific phenotype is represented by one specific goal, but the system itself contains a hierarchy of latent goals. And so selection between the hierarchical selection between the latent goals is a very significant reduction of configuration space compared to all possibilities. So already having the hierarchy of latent goals that has been either encoded by path selection or through some other mechanisms. In particular, it might be the case that new goals emerge not through direct path selection, but as an emergent new potential goal, which might be a perfect example of induction of these new goal states. So this is another mechanism of evolvability, avoiding achieving other states, and instead focusing on this hierarchical retrieval of goal states and decision making among those goal states to arrive to a global phenotype. Okay, so the other side is structural mechanisms of evolvability, and these might be more straightforward and more intuitive consequence of this hierarchically modular structures, and this approximation of this hierarchical modular approximation to any phenotype, which is reuse of modules across scales. So in this specific example, one might try to imagine how to guess the goal states of the right object based on the goal states of the left object. And generally speaking, how to guess those objects that haven't been observed or measured, but are in kind of the neighborhood of the existing possibilities. And then when you extrapolate this to longer scales, you can try to understand in for example, a computational simulation setting, where the actual phenotypes that exist at a particular moment of time or has been existed throughout the history of the process, how they occupy the space of possibilities, and what kind of like simple dynamical models can reproduce that specific subset or approximately that specific subset. Okay, so this is the last slide, which is a kind of a philosophical ending, but I think also extremely important, which is that when you do this hierarchical modular decomposition in such evolutionary and learning setting, it is very important to be clear about what the modules are, what they correspond to, what are they the units of. And so I would like to tell you at least 5 different types of units. And I think it would be very useful to try to relate these in hierarchical decomposition according to these different definitions of what the units, what the modules are, and try to relate these to each other. One is the units of selection. I just tell you all the 5, and then maybe we can discuss later if we want to discuss any specific 2 or in any combination of them. But so units of selection in an evolutionary setting. So this is what the left figure tries to represent, which is that the G2, the selection on G2 might happen in at least, or can be factorized to 3 different sources, and they might contradict to each other. And this is the core of a conflict of interest between levels in evolutionary theory. It is very important in an evolutionary setting when we don't design these architectures, but we evolve them, to talk about units of selection. Then the other is units of competency, which here are represented by these goal variables, which might be different than the units of selection in a general setting. The number 3 is the units of dimension reduction of some behavior. So if you try to imagine this as a top-down, as I said, a top-down view, which is that you try to factorize the behavior and try to do effective factorization, effective approximation of the global behavior to this hierarchical modular decomposition. This dimension reduction might again lead to different modules in this hierarchical modular decomposition. Number 4 is physical structure, right? So you can imagine like coupling strengths, or in any other way physically measuring what are the modules of such a global phenotype. And the number 5 is the historical contingency, right? So what are the stepping stones that have been used, and also possibly or likely modified, of course, but what are the stepping stones that have been used to build the current objects? And so these are 5 different concepts of modules in a hierarchical modular decomposition. And I think it would be a very productive conversation to try to relate these 5 to each other in specific circumstances or more general formalisms. Okay, so just to relate back to the very beginning of the presentation, the emergent universe is structured all the way down in this sense. And with that, thank you very much. And the first preprint is on arXiv with probably a crisper explanation of these ideas. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to discuss.
Yeah, thanks so much. Very interesting. Anybody else questions first?
I do have a question. Thank you for the great presentation. One thing I noticed in your slides is that you have these pictures where the modules are the capital G's, right? They are like nicely demarcated. And when they combine, they still have the sharp boundaries. In biology, presumably these boundaries are fuzzier and overlapping. You find this in metabolic pathways, in brain networks, even in artificial neural networks, because typically they follow what's known as sub-symbolic computation. You cannot neatly put a boundary around symbols that they're using, so much is overlapping and so on and so forth. Do you think about that in your framework, and how do you think it might affect?
I think it's a very good question. I think about my framework or this specific framework not as a fully defined mathematical formalism. So as a first, my first answer is that I'm agnostic to that. Obviously, if there is overlap, then you might try to exploit that structure to be more precise, right? So it's all about what is the structure that you can exploit, that you already know. So I haven't thought about this setting. What I had in mind is this experiment where you try to observe from this goal-directed point of view what are the different goals a specific collective of cells or elementary components can pursue, can achieve under different conditions, and then you start to combine these hierarchically, and you try to come up with a minimal formalism where you have a chance to learn the composite behaviors hierarchically and potentially arrive to a good approximation of the global behavior.
Got it. Thank
Which
you.
is obviously a guess, right? So that's why and experiments will decide if this is a useful framework or not.
Anybody else? I was hoping to ask a question about earlier in your talk, you mentioned the genotype-phenotype mapping. And I was just curious, what have you done some sort of modeling of that in any kind of detail? And if so, what sorts of
Yes. So I didn't do. I did some analytical calculations. They are also in this preprint. They are the most boring part of this preprint, or maybe the most interesting, depending on the point of view. But it turns out that you can have. I go back to that slide first. So you can have two representations. One is the distribution of the number of local variables or genes, the bottom squares here, that are important in determining the top variable, right? So here is 2 and 2, 4, 6, 8. Right, so the distribution of the number of those variables, and so that's one distribution, and there is another distribution which is the number of genotypes that represent a phenotype that I have been mentioning. So these are two distributions, and one can be transformed to the other. So if the variables are well defined, so for example, let's say the local variables are binary variables or any other well-defined variables, then there is a clear mapping between these two distributions. it's just a change of variable in a probability density function. And intuitively, it's and not just mathematically, also it's an exponential transformation because the number of possibilities is a product of the number of states of each of these local variables that matter. So it's an exponential transformation of this random variable. And it turns out that if you have a very narrow distribution of the number of variables, that this exponential transformation of the underlying random variable makes the genotype-phenotype statistics very uneven and parallel-like in a very broad range over many scales. So what I did, for example, in this specific paper is I assumed that the number of variables is represented by a Poisson distribution, which is a pretty narrow distribution. And even in that case, this exponential transformation that maps that distribution to the genotype-phenotype statistics distribution that we're interested in will be a parallel distribution with some kind of exponential cutoff in the end, but the exponential cutoff happens where it doesn't matter, meaning that we already covered the whole genotype space. Yes.
Sorry. So what I was trying to understand is what exactly do you mean by phenotype? Because at least on the biology end, and so this is why I'm asking, like, what kind of simulation or whatever you have in mind, because in biology, there are some phenotypes that are very close to the genetics. So for example, there are properties of a protein which are encoded directly by the genetic sequence. Great. And then there are other phenotypes ranging from a large scale organismal anatomy to behavioral traits to, all kinds of stuff that is many, many steps away from the genetics. And actually, what's important is that those steps are not just complexity. There's actually a lot of intelligence and problem solving built into turning the genetic sequence into what people then score as phenotypes. So I was just curious, what kind of phenotype, what genetic representation are you looking at? Are you looking at the biology or something else? And how far, how direct of an encoding are you thinking for what you're calling the phenotype?
I generally assume that there might be this transformation delta G at every single step that transforms the Gauss. So it might be the case that the global target state or Gauss state is not very close to any of the local possible Gauss states.
Understood. It can be far, but is it in the same space even? Because typically the things we measure as phenotypes are not even, they're not in the same space as the genotype at all.
Yes. So the G2 already tries to be a different space, and I think the underlying assumption that these transformations gradually transform the spaces. And instead of assuming, which might be a good, might be a bad approximation for a specific case, instead of assuming that those are separate spaces, the suggestion is to try to do such a small step in this compositional sense that the spaces can be transformed and the higher level spaces can be approximated from the lower level spaces instead of being separate.